A young guy, Rick, takes care of his sick mother, makes sure that she eats and takes medicine. One day, he finds her with a pistol in her hands, mumbling biblical texts. The sight was creepy, and before he manages to react, the mother apologizes and pulls the trigger. 3 years have passed. Rick tries to arrange his life. He looks for work at a construction site. His previous place is already taken. In despair, he turns to his friend Jeremy with a request to arrange him, and despite being late, he is taken. During work, Rick injures his hand and notices in the garden a woman named Antoinette. He politely asks for a first aid kit, but she refuses, explaining that he needs only to wash the wound in order to continue working. The woman agrees. While Rick treats the cut, the servant whispers something to Antoinette, and she immediately orders Rick to leave. However, on the way out, he notices a little table in the room on which lies money. Tormented by his poverty, he sneaks in. Drayton, apparently the owner of the mansion, appears. Angry, Antoinette immediately fires Rick, promising that he will never find work anywhere again. Rick begs her not to be harsh, admits his mistake, and explains that he was robbed that morning and he needed to pay for the road home. To his surprise, Mr. Drayton forgives him and hands him the whole stack of money in advance. Nothing causes as much suspicion as a rich old man calmly handing out bundles of cash. And indeed, what could go wrong? That same night, Rick moves in with Jeremy. He asks Rick what he would do if he had billions. Rick dreams of luxury, of expensive dinners, and of resuming relations with his ex-girlfriend. Jeremy laughs, calling Rick a loser who never finishes what he starts, hence his disastrous situation. The next day, Rick and Jeremy discuss their construction site, but then Antoinette appears and calls Rick to Mr. Drayton. The old man admits that he regrets that he has no family to whom he could leave his fortune. Then he asks Rick whether he is a believer. Rick answers that he once was. Drayton, once an atheist, has now become terribly religious. And here he makes a sinister proposal. If Rick eats a dish from Drayton's body, then he will inherit all his fortune. Rick is horrified. He thinks this is a joke, but Drayton insists, just one dish, and he will be endlessly rich until the end of his days. And it is unclear, is this simply whims of rich people or the old man out of horrors? In any case, Rick refuses, but Drayton assures that it is exactly Rick who is suitable for this. That same night, Rick finds at Jeremy's a party. There turns out to be Tanya, but they do not have time to talk, since Jeremy comes up to them and mocks Rick's screw-ups. Later, Tanya says that she did not at all expect that Rick would stay with her after the death of his mother. Suddenly, Jeremy, already quite drunk, arranges a drunken scandal. For Rick, this was extremely unpleasant and humiliating a sight. Rick sits in his room, depressed, staring at the pistol and thinking about the worst. However, he puts it aside and begins to cry. The next morning, he frantically calls potential places of work, all without result. And then a knock at the door. Some man hands Rick an envelope and reports that he is awaited at the mansion. Inside the envelope, an invitation and a corresponding suit. The man says that he will wait for him in the car outside. He behaves extremely respectfully, which causes Rick's suspicion regarding Jeremy. Soon he arrives at Mr. Drayton's mansion, where Antoinette reports that Mr. Drayton died that morning. She hands him a contract and explains that if Rick eats a dish from Drayton's body, he will inherit all his fortune. However, he will have to eat everything to the last crumb, and no one outside the mansion must know about this. Otherwise, he will lose everything. Rick hesitates for a long time, but in the end agrees. Soon on the body of Mr. Drayton, plates with food are served. Rick by force eats dish after dish, until at the end there remain pieces laid directly on Drayton's chest. Antoinette reminds that he must eat absolutely everything to the last crumb, and Rick somehow copes with this. When he finishes, Antoinette hands him a note with the last words of Mr. Drayton. There it is said that Rick takes upon himself all privileges of Drayton and gives in return his own soul. Without thinking, Rick signs the contract and leaves, but it already becomes clear that he feels unwell. Soon he returns home and, exhausted, falls into bed. But when he closes his eyes, he finds himself underwater, surrounded by disgusting demonic creatures. He screams in fear until the vision engulfs him entirely. One should be more careful with what one wishes and with whom one swears loyalty. The next morning, Rick wakes up and notices in the corridor of the house a man who is looking at him. When their gazes cross, that one runs away. Rick rushes after him, but he is stopped by Antoinette, behaving as if nothing strange is happening. She says that now the mansion belongs to him and that he can fire or hire any servants. Rick refuses, not knowing what to do with the new life. Antoinette gives him a credit card without limits and advises to enjoy the wealth and not to worry about its origin. Later, Rick returns to Jeremy to take his things. He tries to give Jeremy money, but that one refuses, saying that he will manage himself. Tanya sees Rick and asks if he won the lottery. Rick answers that something even better happened. She asks if he is okay, and Rick assures that yes. Then he offers her to go somewhere, as before, but Tanya cannot. Jeremy is waiting for her. Later, Rick goes to a club and orders rare whiskey. A man sitting nearby mocks, thinking that Rick does not belong here, and doubts how he even dared to order whiskey. In response, Rick orders 2 bottles of expensive whiskey, one for himself and one for that man. When Rick returns home, he begins to drink, but suddenly sees before him a woman. He touches his face and notices that he has blood from his nose. Before he manages to react, the woman disappears and then again appears and attacks him, screaming and accusing him of what happened to her. Suddenly, Rick again finds himself underwater, suffocating. He comes to himself in complete horror and discovers that he lies on the floor all in wet clothes. In panic, he immediately runs down to find Antoinette and demand explanations. He accuses her that she mixed psychoactive substances into him and tells about the soaked woman who attacked him. Antoinette remains calm and says that he should calm down, but Rick demands answers. Then he asks about that phrase which he read after the meal. Antoinette hands him a sheet. While Rick rereads it, everything begins to fall into place, and he is seized by deep despair when he realizes what he got into. When Rick asks whether all this can be real, Antoinette explains that before death, Mr. Drayton was carried away by strange religious rituals, hoping to avoid, as he thought, his fate, hell. Soon Rick discovers a book about one ancient practice, according to which families hired a person, usually a peasant, so that he ate food from the body of the deceased, possibly their relative, thereby taking upon himself the sins of the dead. Such people were called sin eaters. Rick understands that this ritual has the most direct relation to him. Antoinette confirms this and adds that enormous wealth always has its price, and this price Rick paid when he ate from the body of Drayton. Is this a moment suitable for panic? Yes. Rick begins to panic and think about how to fix this. Without waiting for an answer, he runs out of the house. Not listening to Antoinette's calls to calm down, he comes to a church to confess. He admits that he knows that he has sinned, but does not even understand completely what his sin is. The priest says that first it is necessary to realize all one's misdeeds before hoping for forgiveness. Without this absolution of sins is impossible. In irritation, Rick returns home and questions the servants about Mr. Drayton. However, they avoid him, refusing to speak. At this stage, Rick probably already regrets that he cannot fire them all and hire people who would at least tell something. Finally, he demands from Antoinette answers, threatening her with dismissal if she does not tell everything. Antoinette calmly hands Rick documents: the forensic report about Mr. Drayton's death, photographs from the crime scene, police materials, and confessions recorded on tape. From them, Rick learns that Mr. Drayton was a suspect in the murder of his wife Susan, who cheated on him. Drayton always repeated that he was not guilty. Rick realizes that the spirit of the woman who attacked him is the ghost of Susan. Soon, Rick again comes to church and in confession admits that he killed Susan. The priest asks why he did it, but Rick, depressed, says that he does not know. He only regrets everything. While the priest prays, the vengeful spirit of Susan again appears and tries to strangle Rick. Fortunately, the prayers of the priest work faster than Rick manages to make a decision, and Susan retreats. Rick is saved. The next day, Tanya calls Rick and says that she worries about Jeremy. In her words, Jeremy behaves suspiciously. He distances himself. Tanya asks Rick to talk with him before it becomes too late. That same evening, Rick notices a dark figure, silently frozen next to his sofa. Suddenly, the lamp crashes to the floor. Following the rope lying on the floor, Rick freezes in horror, seeing nearby a man in a mask. The man in a mask moves in his direction, and Rick, like a bullet, rushes to the second floor, hoping to find Antoinette. But instead, a child's ghost suddenly appears before him. As soon as Rick begins to panic, Antoinette appears and calmly asks whether he called her. Rick tries to explain something, but cannot find words. Then Antoinette tells the shocking truth. Mr. Drayton was not born rich. He too was a sin eater. That is how he got his fortune. Sin eaters take upon themselves all the sins of their clients, including grave ones. Antoinette says that everything Rick now sees, ghosts, creepy visions, is the result of sins consumed by him. She makes it clear that these torments will never end. Antoinette explains that over time Mr. Drayton was literally devoured by this burden. He lived in constant fear, haunted by the same visions that now torment Rick. In the end, Mr. Drayton could not endure and committed suicide, knowing that his sins would pass to Rick. Rick asks how he can get rid of these sins. Antoinette says that the only way is to pass them to someone who will agree to take his place. If not, he will have to bear these sins until the end of life and suffer already after death. She advises him to enjoy wealth while possible and offers pills to ease the condition. Rick refuses, declaring that she cannot help him. He again goes to the church in search of comfort, but the priest refuses to let him in. Even the priest, it seems, has only one reaction to all this. No way, buddy, this is not my business. That same night, Rick lies in bed and still cannot fall asleep. At last, he gives up and takes the pills. Lying in bed, he sees how next to him appears a ghostly figure. It disappears and after a few moments appears again, looming over him. Rick in horror jumps from the bed. Foam comes from his mouth. At this moment, Antoinette comes in, but Rick is already somewhat in an altered state. He hears the voice of his mother and sees how she stands before him. When Rick goes to her figure, Dr. Kildare brings him to his senses. Later, Rick tells Antoinette that he wants to try something new. Antoinette, though skeptical, agrees to help and admits that even Mr. Drayton never considered this idea. She asks Rick whether he is really ready to give up everything. He is ready. However, when she asks if he has a candidate for the role of new sin eater, Rick suggests that Antoinette herself take his sins instead of him. He believes that this will free her from her present life and for the first time give her complete power over herself. Antoinette says that her contract may not allow this. Rick insists, claiming that he cannot cope alone. Soon Antoinette suggests to appoint Jeremy as the new sin eater, but Rick refuses, saying that he cannot do this to a person he has known all his life. Antoinette explains that she means a person who has experience in criminal deeds and theft. Unexpectedly, Rick notices behind her back a ghost and begins to get even more nervous, insisting that Jeremy will not fit. At this moment, Jeremy calls and says that he has problems with dangerous people and urgently needs money. Rick rushes to him with cash. In the apartment, complete chaos. Rick just in case takes a pistol, but soon he sees a ghost, pleading for help, and in panic shoots. A little later, he realizes that he shot Tanya. In shock, he looks at her lifeless body. Soon, Rick's driver comes in, takes him away from the crime scene, and drives back home. Antoinette assures him that everything will be settled. Exhausted, Rick says that he wants it all to end, and Antoinette reminds that he knows what needs to be done for peace. Rick decides to pass the curse to Jeremy and calls him. Jeremy arrives in deep grief and reports that Tanya is dead. He blames himself, believing that he could have saved her. Having lost all hope, Jeremy asks to take him to work. Here, Antoinette reveals the truth. Rick wants Jeremy to become his sin eater. For this, Jeremy must eat a dish from Rick's body in order to inherit his wealth. Shocked, Jeremy asks whether Rick is dying. Antoinette explains that Rick understood that this life does not suit him and is sure that Jeremy can endure this burden. Rick lies on the table, and Dr. Kildare prepares the ritual. Antoinette assures that everything will go as it should. Soon, Kildare makes Rick a lethal injection, and his heart stops. In another world, Rick comes to himself and sees ghosts, pleading for help, and in the distance, his mother. When he comes closer, her image turns into Tanya. They apologize to each other before Tanya disappears before his eyes. Soon, ghosts attack Rick, but the spirit of his mother drives them away. Then Rick with difficulty takes a breath and, regaining consciousness, realizes that he is alive. Antoinette confirms that Jeremy completed the ritual, said the prayer, and took over Rick's fate. And indeed, Rick notices that the ghosts disappeared and realizes that he is finally free. Antoinette says that Jeremy accepted his new role and hopes that Rick will do the same. 6 months later, Rick works at a construction site, having forgotten about his former life. At this time, Antoinette writes Jeremy's name into the book of sin eaters. And in the mansion, Jeremy is haunted by the same ghosts that tormented Rick. Antoinette hears his frightened screams echoing through the empty corridors, and her eyes mysteriously glisten, making it clear that through this mansion will pass still many sin eaters. Rick, meanwhile, sits at lunch at a break in the park under a tree, settled, but he is not alone there. Nearby silently sits the ghost of Tanya. At the same time, it is visible that Rick never repented for her murder, and the very presence of Tanya, it seems, no longer bothers him.